She married a mountain man in a coma, but one kiss woke him up forever. Clara had always been a woman of quiet strength. She lived in a small frontier town at the edge of the Wild West, where life was simple but often harsh. Every morning she would wake to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of fresh bread baking at Mrs. Whitaker's bakery. Her family had once been farmers, but after a series of dry summers and poor harvests, Clara's parents had passed away, leaving her to manage a small home on her own. Despite the hardships, she never let despair take over her spirit. Her days were full of chores, helping neighbors, and small acts of kindness that made her known as one of the most compassionate people in town. Life in the town moved slowly. Men worked the land or tended their shops, and women like Clara helped each other with cooking, sewing, and caring for children. Yet, even with the calmness of everyday life, Clara often felt a quiet longing, as if something was missing. She dreamed of adventure beyond the town's dusty streets, of mountains she had only seen from afar, and of someone who could understand her heart. She had heard stories of rugged mountain men, men who lived off the land, fearless and free. They seemed like people from another world, untouchable and mysterious. Clara never imagined she would meet one so close to home. That meeting happened on a crisp autumn morning. Clara was walking along the edge of the forest, gathering herbs and berries for the winter. She loved these walks, the way the sunlight danced through the trees, the scent of pine in the air, and the quiet sound of nature that made the world feel alive. As she moved deeper into the woods, she heard a faint cry. At first she thought it was an injured animal, but then she saw him. He was a man, tall and strong, with dark hair that fell in messy waves over his forehead. His clothes were torn and his face had streaks of dirt and blood, but there was something in his eyes that made Clara's heart skip a beat, an intensity, a kind of wildness, but also a vulnerability she couldn't ignore. He was trying to free a young fawn trapped in a hunter's net, and his efforts were valiant but dangerous. Clara didn't hesitate. She ran to help him, and together they managed to free the frightened animal. "Thank you," the man said, his voice rough but sincere. He looked at Clara with eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. "I'm Jacob," he added, extending a hand. Clara shook it, feeling the strength in his grip, but also noticing the gentleness in the way he smiled. From that moment, something changed in Clara's life. She found herself drawn to Jacob's quiet courage, his knowledge of the forest, and the way he seemed connected to the land. He spoke little about himself, but what he did say was filled with honesty and depth. He told her about living in the mountains, how he had learned to survive on his own, and how the world outside the forest often misunderstood men like him. Clara listened, fascinated by his stories, and over time, a bond began to form between them. They met often in the woods. Sometimes they would sit by the river, watching the water flow and talk about their dreams. Other times, Jacob would teach Clara how to identify plants, track animals, or build a small fire without flint. She laughed more with him than she had in years. There was a sense of freedom around him, a feeling that life could be more than chores and routines. She began to realize that her longing for adventure was tied to him, not just the mountains, but the person he was. But life in the Wild West was unpredictable, and fate had its own plans. One afternoon, Jacob decided to climb a steep cliff near the edge of the forest to rescue a trapped mountain goat. Clara had warned him to be careful, her heart heavy with worry, but Jacob had always been fearless. He said, "I've done this 100 times. Don't worry, Clara. I'll be fine." She watched him disappear over the edge, a mixture of pride and fear twisting inside her. Minutes turned into hours, and Jacob did not return. Clara's worry grew into panic. She ran along the cliff, calling his name, her voice echoing against the rocky walls. When she reached the top, she saw him lying motionless, his body twisted in an unnatural angle. Her heart stopped. She ran to him, tears streaming down her face. The ground beneath them was stained with blood, and she could see that he had suffered a severe fall. She shook him gently, calling his name, but he did not move. The townsfolk were called to help. They carried Jacob back to the small cabin Clara had been using as a temporary shelter. The doctor examined him carefully, shaking his head. "He's in a deep coma," he said quietly. "We can only hope he wakes up. His injuries are severe." Clara felt as if the world had stopped. The man who had brought adventure, laughter, and warmth into her life now lay silent, his chest rising and falling slowly with each breath. Clara refused to leave his side. She tended to his wounds, cleaned the cabin, and made sure he was warm and comfortable. Every day she spoke to him, telling him stories of the town, of small joys, of the fawn they had saved together. She would sing softly in the evenings, hoping her voice might reach him even in his unconscious state. The townspeople watched in awe. Some thought she was foolish, waiting for a man who might never wake. Others admired her devotion, whispering about the strength it took to care so deeply for someone who could not respond. As the weeks passed, Clara learned the rhythm of life with Jacob in a coma. She set up a small routine: morning walks to gather herbs, preparing his meals, reading letters aloud, and talking to him about everything she saw and felt. She discovered a quiet resilience within herself, a depth of love and patience she had never known before. Her friends brought her supplies, and some stayed to keep her company. But it was her own courage that carried her through the long days and even longer nights. At times she felt an overwhelming sadness. She would sit by his bedside, holding his hand, and wonder if he would ever open his eyes again. She remembered the way he had smiled when they freed the fawn, the way his eyes had looked at her with kindness and curiosity, and she refused to believe that this was the end of his story. "You'll wake up," she whispered to him, her voice trembling but determined. "I know you will. We still have so much life to live together." Through it all, Clara realized that her love for Jacob was not just about romance. It was about hope, courage, and faith. She had promised herself that she would stand by him, and she would not break that promise. She found comfort in the small signs of life: the twitch of his fingers, the steady beat of his heart, the faint rise and fall of his chest. Each day these signs reminded her that he was still there, still fighting, even if he could not show it. The forest outside continued its quiet rhythm. Birds sang in the mornings, snow began to blanket the ground in winter, and the world moved on. Yet inside the cabin, time felt suspended. Clara's life became intertwined with Jacob's silent one. She spoke to him of her dreams, of the future she imagined with him, and sometimes she would laugh at memories of their adventures together. Though he could not respond, she felt a connection that went beyond words, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Clara sat by the window, holding a warm cloth against his forehead. She watched the sky turn shades of pink and gold, and thought of all the moments they had shared, however brief. She whispered to him, "You are not alone, Jacob. I am here, and I will not leave. Not now, not ever." Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart trembled with hope and fear. Clara did not know what the future held. She did not know if Jacob would wake, or if the days ahead would be filled with sorrow. But she knew that she could not give up. Her love had become a quiet force, a guiding light in the darkness. She had learned that sometimes strength was not in action, but in patience, devotion, and the courage to continue when all seemed lost. And so, every day, Clara continued her vigil. She continued to hope. She continued to love. And somewhere deep inside, she felt that their story was far from over. The man who had captured her heart in the woods, the mountain man with eyes that seemed to hold the wild itself, was still there. And she believed, with every fiber of her being, that one day he would open his eyes and life would change forever. Clara's days became a quiet rhythm of care, hope, and unwavering devotion. After Jacob's accident, the small cabin they had shared in the forest became both a sanctuary and a prison of emotions. Each morning she would rise before the sun, carefully preparing his breakfast and tending to the small fire that kept the cabin warm through the crisp mountain air. She would talk to him as she moved about her chores, describing everything she saw outside. The birds hopping along the frost-covered ground, the sun glinting off the snow-laden trees, even the squirrels leaping from branch to branch. It was as if by speaking aloud, she could bring the outside world into his unconscious world, keeping him connected to life. Despite the long hours of caring for Jacob, Clara also had to deal with the curiosity and concern of the townspeople. Some came to check on her, offering supplies or advice, while others whispered behind her back, "Why does she spend so much time with him? He may never wake," some said. But Clara ignored the judgment. She knew that love was not measured by what others understood, but by the depth of one's heart and the courage to hold on when hope seemed fragile. As the weeks turned into months, Clara discovered new ways to care for him. She read aloud from the small collection of books she had brought, stories of distant lands and daring adventures. She wrote letters to him, even though she did not know if he could read them, describing her thoughts, her dreams, and the small happenings in town. She would sometimes sing softly, letting her voice fill the room with warmth and comfort. Every sound, every word, was meant to remind him of life, of the love and hope waiting for him. One cold morning, as Clara fed the fireplace and arranged his blankets, she found a bundle of letters and notes Jacob had once kept in the cabin. He had written about his life in the mountains, about the animals he had cared for, and about the solitary winters he had survived. Some notes were simple reminders about chores or paths to follow in the forest, but others were more personal, reflections on his childhood, his fears, and the rare moments of joy he had experienced. Clara read each word with reverence, feeling as though she were discovering the man behind the rugged exterior, the soul beneath the strong arms and wild hair. It became clear to her that Jacob was not just strong and brave. He was thoughtful and deeply connected to the world around him. She learned about his family, long gone, and how he had learned to survive in the mountains at a young age. He had known loss and loneliness, but he had also known small triumphs, catching a fish in a frozen stream, helping a lost traveler find shelter, or simply watching the sunrise over a valley that seemed endless. Clara realized that in caring for him now, she was becoming part of that story, part of the life he had built silently before her. The passing months were not easy, but the winters in the mountains were long and harsh. Snow would drift against the cabin walls, and the cold would seep in despite the fire. Clara would sometimes wake in the middle of the night shivering to adjust the blankets or add more wood to the stove. The nights were quiet except for the occasional howl of a distant wolf or the creaking of the cabin in the wind. Sometimes she would sit by Jacob's side, holding his hand in hers, and simply whisper words of comfort, hoping they could reach him in the quiet recesses of his mind. Despite the challenges, Clara began to feel a strange sense of purpose. She realized that love was more than laughter and shared joy. It was patience, endurance, and the courage to stand by someone when life tested them the most. She began to find joy in small victories, a slight twitch of Jacob's fingers, a change in the rhythm of his breathing, a tiny smile that curved at the corner of his lips in a moment she could not explain. Each of these moments reminded her that he was still there, still fighting in his own way, and it strengthened her resolve to never give up. Through this time, Clara also built friendships with the townspeople who respected her commitment. Mrs. Whitaker, the baker, would often bring fresh bread and pastries, leaving them at the cabin door with a kind smile. Other neighbors offered blankets, firewood, or small treats for Jacob. Some would stay to help with chores, giving Clara a brief rest, but she always returned to his side as soon as she could. The town began to see her not just as a compassionate woman, but as someone with a heart strong enough to defy despair. As Clara continued her vigil, she also reflected on her own life and dreams. Before Jacob's accident, she had often wondered about adventure beyond the small town, but now she realized that adventure could take many forms. Caring for Jacob, sharing her life with him even in his unconscious state, and discovering the depths of her own courage was an adventure of its own. It was filled with challenges she could never have imagined, and yet it gave her a sense of purpose she had never felt before. One afternoon, as the sun shone through the frost-laden windows, Clara decided to take Jacob's care a step further. She began creating a small routine for him, mixing physical therapy with gentle touch, helping him move his arms and legs, and massaging his hands and shoulders to maintain circulation. Though he could not respond, Clara spoke to him the entire time, encouraging him gently. "You are strong, Jacob. You can do this. I am here, and I will not leave you," she would whisper. Her hands were steady, her voice full of warmth, and even in the silent room, it felt as if life itself lingered between them. Through all these efforts, Clara began to notice something remarkable. The longer she cared for him, the more she felt a silent connection forming between them. She would sometimes catch a flicker of movement in his eyes, a sign that he was aware of her presence, even if he could not respond. It gave her hope, a quiet certainty that he could hear her love and devotion. This connection became a lifeline for Clara, a reason to wake each day with determination, no matter how cold or lonely the nights had been. Clara also discovered the depth of her own emotions. She realized that love could exist without expectation, without immediate reward, and without recognition. Her love for Jacob was pure, patient, and unwavering. It was a love built on hope, courage, and the belief that life could triumph even in the darkest moments. She began to see her care not as a duty but as a privilege, a chance to be part of something extraordinary, something that went beyond ordinary life in the small frontier town. The seasons changed slowly. Snow gave way to the first blooms of spring, and the world outside the cabin awakened once more. Clara would open the windows to let in the fresh air, describing each new flower, each bird returning from migration, and the changes in the forest as if Jacob could see them. She told him about the town, the children playing in the streets, the laughter that echoed in the mornings, and the small victories of everyday life. Her words filled the cabin with life, warmth, and the promise that their story was far from over. Through every challenge, every long and lonely night, Clara never wavered. She knew that Jacob's life had been extraordinary even before her, and she believed that the strength of her devotion could help him find his way back. She had learned patience beyond measure, endurance beyond reason, and the quiet power of hope that refused to be extinguished. In every touch, every whispered word, and every small gesture, she carried the belief that love, when pure and steadfast, could overcome even the deepest silence. And so Clara continued her vigil, each day blending care with hope, routine with devotion, and the present with dreams of a future yet to come. She did not know when or how Jacob might awaken, but she knew that she would be ready when that moment arrived. Her heart, her hands, and her spirit were all devoted to him, and in that devotion she found a strength she had never known. Though the outside world moved on, with townspeople tending to their farms and daily tasks, inside the cabin time felt suspended. It was a place of quiet magic, where love and hope held the power to transcend the ordinary, and where Clara's unwavering heart kept the light of life burning, waiting for the day when Jacob would finally open his eyes and see the world again. The months that followed tested Clara in ways she had never imagined. Life in the small frontier town had its own challenges, but nothing compared to the days and nights spent at Jacob's bedside. Each morning she woke with the same thought: to care for him, to speak to him, and to never give up hope. Some mornings the sunlight would spill into the cabin, warming the frost-covered floor and bringing a sense of peace. But other mornings were cold and gray, the wind rattling the windows, making her feel the weight of solitude more than ever. Yet she persisted. Clara had learned the importance of small routines. She would begin her day by tending to the fire, making sure it burned brightly enough to keep the cabin warm. Then she would prepare Jacob's meals, soft and nourishing, sometimes mashed vegetables, sometimes warm stews, ensuring he had strength even in his unconscious state. As she worked, she would talk to him about everything: the town's simple happenings, the weather, the people, even the quiet stories of her own childhood. She wanted him to feel the rhythm of life around him, as if her words could guide him back from the deep silence of his coma. Despite her devotion, Clara felt the weight of loneliness pressing in. She had friends in town who tried to help, but their lives were busy, and only she seemed willing to stay day and night by his side. Some neighbors expressed concern. "She spends all her time with him. It's like she's forgotten the world outside," they whispered. But Clara paid them no mind. Her heart told her that love was not measured by the opinions of others, but by patience, endurance, and the courage to wait. She had chosen to be with Jacob in his most vulnerable state, and she knew she could not turn back. As the seasons changed, Clara noticed small signs of life that filled her with hope. Sometimes Jacob's fingers would twitch or his eyebrows would move slightly. Occasionally, a faint sigh would escape him, and she would hold her breath, wondering if it was a response to her voice or simply the rhythm of his body. These tiny signs became victories for her, moments to celebrate in silence, as though each one was a message from him saying, "I am still here." They kept her going through the long, lonely nights. Clara also discovered more about Jacob's past during this time. She found a worn journal tucked beneath the floorboards of his cabin. Its pages were filled with stories of his life in the mountains, how he had learned to survive on his own, how he had faced storms and blizzards, and how he had learned to care for injured animals he found along the way. Some pages were simple and practical, like lists of edible plants or maps of the surrounding hills. Others were deeply personal, reflections of his thoughts, his fears, and the rare moments of joy he had experienced. Clara read each word carefully, feeling as if she were uncovering the layers of the man she loved. Through these discoveries, Clara realized just how extraordinary Jacob was. He had lived a life of solitude, learning to endure and survive, yet he had never lost his compassion. His heart had always been open, even if the world had been harsh. Clara felt honored to care for him now, to be part of his story, and to offer the same compassion and devotion he had shown to the world in his own quiet way. She began to understand that love was not always about shared moments of laughter or adventure. Sometimes it was about being present, steady, and patient through the toughest trials. The cabin became a small world unto itself. Inside, the fire burned constantly, filling the air with warmth and light. Outside, the seasons shifted, with snow giving way to spring blooms and then to the heat of summer. Clara would open the windows to let the fresh air in, describing each change to Jacob as if he could see it. She would talk about the flowers, the returning birds, and the way the river sparkled in the sunlight. Her voice carried through the cabin, a gentle reminder that life continued, even in the midst of hardship. Clara also learned to find joy in small, unexpected moments. One day a deer wandered close to the cabin and she quietly pointed it out to Jacob. "Look, Jacob," she whispered, "a friend visiting us." She imagined him smiling at the sight, and it gave her a warmth that spread through her chest. On other days, children from the town would leave small gifts of bread, flowers, or drawings on the doorstep. Clara would bring them inside, placing them on the small table beside Jacob's bed, speaking aloud about each gift as if he could see the thoughtfulness behind them. These small acts reminded her that even in the quietest, loneliest moments, life was still full of beauty and connection. As Clara tended to Jacob, she also faced her own fears and doubts. There were nights when she would cry softly into her hands, wondering if he would ever wake. She would feel the weight of exhaustion pressing on her shoulders, the ache of loneliness in her heart. But each time she reminded herself why she stayed. She thought of the first day she met him, the way his eyes had looked at her with kindness and curiosity. She remembered the adventures they had shared, small though they were, and the promise she had made to stand by him no matter what. That promise became her anchor, giving her strength to continue even when hope seemed fragile. Clara also took the time to care for herself in small ways. She would step outside to breathe the fresh air, walk among the trees and feel the earth beneath her feet. She would eat the meals she prepared, tending to her own health so that she could continue caring for Jacob. These moments of self-care were brief but vital, giving her the energy and clarity to face each new day. She knew that love required strength, and that caring for someone in his state was as much about sustaining herself as it was about sustaining him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Clara sat beside Jacob and held his hand in hers. The cabin was quiet except for the crackling of the fire. She spoke softly, her words gentle and filled with hope. "You are strong, Jacob," she whispered. "I know you can come back to me. I am here, and I will not leave you. We still have so much to see, so much to do." She imagined him listening, feeling her devotion, and slowly being drawn back from the darkness of his unconscious world. Through it all, Clara discovered a deeper understanding of life itself. She realized that courage was not always in grand actions, but in quiet persistence. She learned that love could exist without immediate reward, without acknowledgement, and even without a clear outcome. Her devotion to Jacob became a reflection of her own strength, a testament to the human heart's capacity for patience, resilience, and hope. She began to see her role not just as a caregiver, but as a guide, a constant presence, and a reminder that life was worth holding on to, even in the darkest times. The townspeople began to notice her unwavering commitment. Some came to offer words of encouragement, others to simply witness her devotion. They admired her for staying through the harsh winters, for speaking to a man who could not respond, and for maintaining hope when many would have given up. Clara's quiet strength became a symbol of perseverance, inspiring others in ways she had never imagined. Even as she found strength in her daily routine, Clara never lost sight of the man she loved. She remembered the way Jacob had looked at her during their walks, the laughter they had shared while exploring the forest, and the quiet moments of understanding that had passed between them. She imagined the day he would wake, the first smile he would give her, and the moment their hands would meet once more. That vision kept her going, a light in the long, silent nights. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's hope never wavered. She continued her care with gentle hands and a loving heart, speaking to Jacob as if he could hear every word. She described the changes in the forest, the happenings in town, and even her own thoughts and feelings. Her voice became a bridge between the world he had left and the one he would one day return to. Clara had learned that waiting was not a passive act. It was active, filled with intention, devotion, and love. Each day she nurtured Jacob's body, mind, and spirit, preparing him for the moment he would awaken. She held on to the belief that life, no matter how fragile or uncertain, had the power to return, and that her love could help guide him back. And so Clara remained steadfast, a quiet sentinel in the cabin by the forest. She faced each day with courage, patience, and hope. She embraced the small joys, the tiny victories, and the unwavering truth that love, when pure and devoted, could endure even the longest nights. Her heart, her hands, and her spirit were all dedicated to Jacob, and she believed without doubt that one day he would open his eyes and see her waiting, just as she had always imagined. Jacob's first days after waking were slow, careful, and full of wonder. He could feel life returning to his body, and he could see the world with fresh eyes. Every sound, every movement, every gentle touch from Clara seemed magnified with meaning. He watched her closely, noticing the strength, patience, and devotion she had carried throughout his coma. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "Clara, you stayed. You never left me." She smiled, holding his hands tightly. "I promised, Jacob. I knew you would come back. And now, we have the rest of our lives together." Recovering in the cabin was not easy. Jacob had lost months of strength and mobility, and his body needed time to adjust. Clara stayed by his side day and night, helping him walk, regain his balance, and stretch muscles that had grown weak. She was gentle and patient, offering words of encouragement at every step. "Take it slow," she would say. "One step at a time. You are strong, and you can do this. I'm right here with you." Jacob learned quickly that love and patience could be as powerful as any medicine, and each small victory became a reason for celebration. The townspeople, who had watched Clara's devotion for months, were astonished and inspired when they heard of Jacob's awakening. Neighbors visited the cabin, bringing gifts of food, blankets, and small comforts. Children peeked through the windows, fascinated by the man who had returned from a coma and the woman who had never given up. Some of the townsfolk admitted they had doubted Clara, but seeing her love and determination rewarded changed their hearts. They began to respect her in a way that went beyond admiration. They saw her as a symbol of hope and courage. As Jacob regained strength, he and Clara spent more time exploring the mountains around the cabin. The air was crisp and clean, the trees vibrant with spring life, and the river flowed with a renewed energy that mirrored his own. Clara guided him through familiar paths, recounting the months she had spent at his bedside and the world outside that had continued to move. Jacob listened, amazed at her resilience, her courage, and the depth of her love. He realized that every day of his absence had been touched by her devotion, and his heart overflowed with gratitude and love in return. Their life together became a balance of care, adventure, and shared joy. Jacob taught Clara the skills he had learned during his solitary years in the mountains, tracking animals, building shelters, and understanding the subtle signs of nature. She had always admired his courage and knowledge, but now, experiencing it firsthand, she felt an even deeper connection. At the same time, Clara shared her own strengths, her patience, her kindness, and the small wisdom she had gained from years of living independently in the town. Together they became a team, each complementing the other's strengths and nurturing the life they were building anew. Evenings were filled with quiet contentment. They would sit by the fire, talking about the past, sharing dreams for the future, and sometimes simply enjoying the silence together. Clara would read aloud from Jacob's journal, laughing at his youthful musings and marveling at his thoughtful reflections. Jacob, in turn, would listen and sometimes recite passages to her, as if discovering a deeper understanding of himself and the world he had left behind. Each night their bond grew stronger, filled with trust, love, and the shared relief of having survived the trials of the past months. The mountains, which had once been a place of solitude for Jacob, now became a place of shared wonder. They explored hidden valleys, watched the sunrise from high cliffs, and discovered secret streams where the water ran clear and cool. Clara marveled at the beauty of the world around her, feeling grateful that she could share these moments with Jacob. "I always imagined this," she said one morning, as the sun painted the sky with golden light. "But I never thought it would be with you by my side, fully awake and alive." Jacob smiled, taking her hand. "It was worth the wait," he said softly. "Every moment. You waited for me, and now we can enjoy it together." As the seasons continued, the couple began to reconnect with the town. Jacob slowly regained his ability to move through the streets, meet the neighbors, and engage in daily life again. The townspeople, who had once doubted Clara's patience and devotion, now celebrated their story as a miracle. Children would wave when he passed, neighbors would greet him with respect, and many came to share stories of hope and perseverance. Clara and Jacob became symbols not just of love, but of the power of patience, care, and belief in one another. Life together also brought practical joys. Jacob helped Clara with her small garden, planting vegetables and herbs that would provide sustenance for the months ahead. They prepared meals together, laughing as they worked side by side. Even chores that had once felt mundane now carried new meaning, for each task was shared, each moment a reminder of life regained. They celebrated small victories, like Jacob chopping firewood with renewed strength, or Clara harvesting the first ripe tomatoes of the season, with laughter, pride, and gratitude. Their love grew in ways Clara had never imagined. It was no longer just about waiting and hoping. It was about partnership, trust, and the shared understanding of hardship and triumph. Jacob often marveled at Clara's unwavering courage, while she admired his resilience and gentle heart. Together, they formed a life that was both adventurous and deeply comforting, full of laughter, shared stories, and the quiet understanding that they had endured hardships that would never break them. The bond between them also strengthened through small, tender moments. Jacob would sometimes hold Clara close by the fire, feeling the warmth of her hands, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, and the calm of her presence. Clara, in turn, would rest her head on his shoulder, listening to the stories he remembered, feeling his hand brush hers, and knowing that the long months of care and waiting had led to this perfect union. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word became a reminder of the strength of love and the power of devotion. Over time, they began to make plans for the future. They spoke of building a larger cabin, planting more gardens, and exploring the farther reaches of the mountains together. They dreamed of adopting an orphaned animal, helping travelers who became lost in the forest, and sharing their story with others to inspire hope and courage. Each plan was filled with purpose and excitement, for life had become precious in ways they had never fully realized before. Clara often thought back to the long months of waiting and care. She realized that the time Jacob had spent in a coma had transformed them both. She had learned patience, strength, and the quiet power of hope. Jacob had learned the value of human connection, of love, and of the life that awaited him beyond the mountains he had known. Together they had grown stronger, wiser, and more connected to each other than they could have ever imagined. Their story became a legend in the town, Neighbors would tell the tale of Clara, who never gave up on the man she loved, and Jacob, who returned to life through the strength of her devotion. It inspired others to have patience, to love deeply, and to believe in the miracles that can happen when one refuses to surrender hope. Clara and Jacob became not just a couple, but a symbol of unwavering love and courage. Even in quiet moments, their hearts were full. They would sit outside on clear evenings, watching the stars twinkle above the mountains. Clara would rest her head on Jacob's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and he would wrap his arms around her, grateful for every moment.